Perfect. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Shannon Von Belden, and I'm the Rdla Program Director here at the Every Life Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us today on Thursday in September. I can't even believe it's September, to be honest. I know everyone is so busy with everything going on in our own lives and in the world, so we really appreciate our speakers who could join us today, and all of you as well. This is being recorded, so if you want to check it out afterwards or at a later date, it will be put up on the rareadvocates.org website. Next slide, Caitlin. So if you would, if you're having any technical difficulties, you always have the option of just calling in as well. So those details were in the email that you received when you registered for the webinar, and they're listed here too if you're having technical difficulties right now. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the question Q&A chat feature. We will keep an eye on it, and we will direct those questions to the speakers after their presentations. And then we always have this reminder for media. If any media is joining us today, please know that we consider these presentations and remarks off the record, and if you would like to contact any of the speakers to get any quotes, you can contact them afterwards. So today, in honor of Newborn Screening Awareness Month, we have a great panel of speakers to discuss the importance of newborn screening. We're joined by Dylan Simon, who is with the Every Life Foundation, Tara Brandt with Rare Disease Innovations Institute, Brittany Hernandez with the Muscular Dystrophy Association, Jamie Lowy with the Genetic Alliance, Sessions Cole, Dr. Sessions Cole with the Undiagnosed Diseases Network, as well as Megan Haley. So thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us. We'll go ahead and get started with Dylan. You want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Shannon, and thank you everybody for being here. We're really excited about today's webinar and all the newborn screening related discussions. So I'll kind of start this off. It's going to be a little more some state conversations to start this webinar off. And so I'll get us started with kind of a reminder of what arrestable alignment legislation is and why we pursue it and kind of what goes into it. So next slide, please. So the Every Life arrestable alignment legislation really comes out of the idea of we're well aware of the effort that it takes for coalitions, often led by patient advocacy organizations, to get a condition added to the RUSP. This is a 5-10 year, maybe longer process that requires a whole lot of effort to put the package together and get it to a place where it's ready to get added to the RUSP. Unfortunately, after that is done, a lot of these patient organizations still have to go state by state to get their conditions added to each individual state panel. And we here at the Every Life Foundation feel that is too much. They've already put in all the effort to get on the RUSP. We feel that the RUSP should be a minimum, the bar that every state should be meeting. And so the Every Life Foundation likes to go into as many states as possible and work to try to pass this RUSP alignment legislation. And it really includes three main parts. First, it requires states to screen for any disorder recommended by the federal RUSP. Again, this is a minimum. We wouldn't love when states would screen for more than the RUSP, as many states do, but we believe that if a condition is on the RUSP, it should be on every state panel. Second, it implements a timeline for when a state needs to begin screening for a new RUSP disorder once it's officially added to the RUSP. We recognize that once a condition is added to the RUSP, within a couple months, state labs are not ready to be adding conditions to their state panel, but we also believe that the 5 to 8 years that at times it takes to add conditions is also too much. So we believe, and after conversations with multiple state governments and state labs, that 2 to 2.5 year time frame is really kind of a nice little sweet spot where it gives the labs time to prepare, it gives the state program time to prepare for follow-up services, as well as ensure to secure the funding source, which really leads us into the third aspect, which ensures that there's available funding moving forward when a condition is added to the RUSP and then add to the state panel. We recognize that each state is going to go about that differently, which is why the Every Life Foundation goes in with these principles and not necessarily a hard piece of legislation. We have a couple examples of how we've passed RUSP aligned legislation in the past, and we are happy to use those as examples. But we recognize that each state government is going to function a little differently. And so we need to be flexible. We need to work with each state to figure out how best to implement this and how best to secure the long-term funding, because if the funding is not there, then they're not going to be able to necessarily buy the new equipment or the new staff time or ensure that the follow-up services are working to the best of their ability. And that's just not acceptable. And so we need to work with these state governments to ensure that these funding sources are available whenever a condition is going to be added. And that said, there are multiple states which have this version of RUSP alignment. This was led by Every Life in California and Florida. As many of you know, we also led this effort in Georgia this year. We were actually able to pass it unanimously out of the House within a week of its introduction into the Georgia State House. But unfortunately, that was in early March. And before the Senate was able to take up the bill, which we were hopeful that it was going to pass out of the Senate as well, the State Assembly suspended due to COVID. And then when they reconvened, they were focusing solely on COVID and voting issues. And so we were unable to get it passed in Georgia this year. But we're excited for next year. We're hopeful to go into another state and really continue this work and continue to really pursue this effort. So next slide, please. And so another thing we want to talk about today is just some resources that are available and highlight how the Every Life Foundation is really there to support this effort. And so a big part of our resources is our Action Center. So here's a screenshot of it, as you can see, and at the bottom you can see it. You can get there by rarescreening.org. And so this highlights on a very broad view of what conditions are being screened at each individual state. So you can see which states such as California, Florida, Minnesota are screening for all 35 conditions, whereas some other states are screening for only 31, as you can see with Wyoming in this screenshot. And so this gives you a really kind of broad overview of where your state is in terms of screening for RUSP conditions. Next slide, please. And if you click on the actual page, you'll find some more information. So you can see at the top, and this is an example of Virginia. If there's any current legislation that is occurring within your state, there'll be a little header at the top of the page that explains what that legislation is, so you can get involved in that legislation and advocating for that legislation. It also provides some general background information on newborn screening in your state. Again, the number of RUSP conditions screened for, does it have an advisory council, storage of dried blood spots, which laboratory facilities are screening for the conditions, screening fees, and so on. And so this really provides you with an in-depth understanding of newborn screening at the individual state level, so you can understand if you're advocating in your own state, kind of the newborn screening system that is there. And so this really helps really helps with the advocacy effort to really understand the nitty-gritty of your state advocacy, your state newborn screening. Next slide, please. And lastly, the Newborn Screening Bootcamp. So we're co-hosting again this year with Baby First Test. And this is another great resource to really learn more about newborn screening and all that goes into it. So I've talked a lot about the RUSP today, and that's a big part of the conversation around the bootcamp in terms of how to get a condition added to the RUSP and what is needed in terms of building a coalition, building a pilot study, getting on the RUSP, and understanding more about the advisory council. But we also recognize that newborn screening goes beyond the RUSP. So we're going to talk about challenges beyond the RUSP, how patient communities and public health labs can work together better moving forward, and really everything newborn screening related. I've had multiple questions since registration's been open. Is the bootcamp right for me? And my comment is, if you are interested in newborn screening, the bootcamp is right for you. You'll be able to find something there for you. So we really encourage everybody to register. We're really excited. The registration number actually hit 300 the other day, so the registration is going strong. And we're really excited to have a really great bootcamp to hear from a lot of great experts from both the academic, industry, as well as patient space. And so registration is at mbsbootcamp.org. So we look forward to seeing many of you there. And thank you again for your time. And I'll turn it over to Tara.
Thanks, Dylan. Okay, next slide. Okay, hi, I'm here today. I want to thank Every Life Foundation too for hosting this. I think it's super, super important. My name is Tara Britt. I'm president and founder of the Rare Disease Innovations Institute. I created this nonprofit after writing legislation with a patient advocate in North Carolina to create the first Rare Disease Advisory Council in the United States. Okay, advance. And these are just some, I'm not going to go over and read all of these bullets, but the importance of having an advisory council we found in North Carolina, and nonprofits and industry to support this and partners to partner with us, is to create new legislation like with newborn screening. We had a task force that actually did a 30-page white paper that is on our council's website that we share with everyone. And it's the importance of newborn screening. It wasn't advocating for it. It was purely an educational white paper that went to the governor's office with much support from folks like from the Every Life Foundation, from industry, to help add new diseases to our indications in North Carolina. And these are just, like I said, a council is a great way to bring together the rare disease community in your state. For example, and you can advance, we have 7 people in our council and we meet quarterly. And we normally have about 40 people that attend. So we have clinicians, researchers, industry that attend these council meetings and help support the initiatives like newborn screening legislation, genetic testing. So councils are very effective with that. And through the nonprofit, the Rare Disease Innovations Institute, we have created a toolkit where we are helping other states with important legislation. So we give them the tools and help them create successful councils so that they can go in and address issues like newborn screening and things of that nature. And like I said, you know, you can have minimal people on a council, but so many more attend these meetings, and you build your community this way. And it's just a very important way to get important legislation through. And at the heart of it, we're doing this for patients. So patient advocates help drive this, but it is just such a good community to build, and a council helps facilitate that. Okay, next. Like I said, we build public-private partnerships through the nonprofit and through your councils, and we help patient advocates. We listen to patient advocates, they tell us, we ask, what are the most important issues to you right now? What do you think needs changing in the rare disease community? What do we need to address? And then the council and nonprofits like mine can take those in. And like right now, we're addressing access issues within North Carolina through a partnership with the ARM Foundation and RAP. So like I said, I can't stress partnerships enough, and a council is a great way to address these important legislative changes that are needed. Okay, next one. Thank you very much, and feel free to contact me if your state is interested in creating a Rare Disease Advisory Council. All right, Brittany.
Thank you, Tara. Yes, Brittany, go ahead, take it away.
Hey there, thank you so much. It's great to be on. Just checking to make sure that everybody can hear me and see me. We good?
Yep.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, so I'm really pleased to be joining you guys today from MDA. NDA, just as a very brief background, we are an umbrella organization representing people living with 43 different neuromuscular conditions, including ALS, spinal muscular atrophy, Pompe disease, and a number of others. 2 of those conditions are on the RUSP already. So Pompe and SMA, as you guys know, are already on the RUSP. And so we're really happy to work, you know, kind of across the partnership with many partners like Rdla, Every Life, and a number of other organizations towards state implementation of those conditions, and then also working towards the addition of more like Duchenne to the RUSP. And it's really, really lovely to be able to partner with so many other organizations on this goal towards ensuring that as many neuromuscular conditions as possible can be screened for. So today, obviously, I'll be talking about the reauthorization of the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act, and I am happy to answer any questions as they come up, so feel free to shoot them my way. We can hit the next slide. All right, so the status right now of the Newborn Screening Saves Lives authorization is that authorization expired last September, so a year ago this month. The House took quick action, and they voted on reauthorization back in last July. The Senate has yet to take action. There are a number of really great provisions in the House and Senate bills. Notably, though, the House bill includes higher levels of authorization funding for newborn screening activities than does the Senate bill. It also includes some new activities across different agencies on newborn screening, which is really great and that we are very supportive of. And then it commissions a new report on the modernization of newborn screening. So, we know that newborn screening is obviously one of the most successful public health programs in the history of our country, and we all know that, but everything could be modernized and made a little bit more streamlined, more accurate, and so there are some provisions in this bill that would go towards that, and we're excited about that. You can hit the next slide. So what's the deal? Why did the Senate hold it up, and why haven't they done what the House did? So back in 2015 and again this year, or in 2014, the last authorization, and again this year, there's a lot of talk around what's called an informed consent amendment, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. And there are a number of senators who would like to see this amendment included. The amendment, though, while surely well-intentioned, would basically end up drastically changing the newborn screening program as we know it. Informed consent sounds like an easy thing to do, but really in reality, it is a huge bureaucratic undertaking. It takes a lot of funding, it takes a lot of time, and the reality is that many states possibly would just opt not to retain newborn screening samples for research if informed consent were a requirement. And so we at MDA and EveryLife and all of our partners are working to come to an agreement with those senators who would like to see this. But for now, it just hasn't happened yet. And I think that, obviously the current political discourse makes these kind of priorities and negotiations a little bit more challenging. Just not that this is political at all, just that there's so much other stuff happening on the Hill right now that sometimes getting these kind of things finalized can present a real issue. Like I said earlier, the spending levels in the House are higher than the spending levels in the Senate. And so we really want to see the House bill passed because the House bill doesn't have an informed consent amendment on it. It's already passed. It has higher levels of authorization, and it really is just the better of the two bills that have been proposed. So really that's what we're pushing for is passage of that House bill. And then finally, on the holdup issue, the Secretary's Advisory Committee on Heritable Disorders in Newborns and Children, called the ACH-D&C, which was authorized by the last authorization of the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act, is currently meeting, even though the law has not been reauthorized. And so we're in a situation where all the daily work of the National Newborn Screening Program is happening. It's happening in the states. Babies are being screened, research is going on, everything is funded. And so right now, what we are currently trying to turn our attention to, if you can hit the next slide, is appropriations. So we want more money. As always, we want more money. And so MDA, EveryLife Foundation, and a lot of our other partners just sent a letter last night up to the Hill saying, hey, give us this money for newborn screening across all these different agencies. So you can kind of see the priorities that we've asked for here and these numbers. These are reflective of what is in that House bill. And we're really hopeful that, with enough support of advocates like you and others across the community, that we can get these higher levels appropriated in the next round of appropriations. And I will say MDA is putting together a number of, we are putting together an engagement right now that all of our advocates can take action on. I would encourage you guys to take a look at that. I'm sure that EveryLife is doing the same thing. You are welcome to copy and paste our stuff and send it from your own email address, or do it from our advocacy site. Either way works for me. So long as somebody's making the ask, that's all that matters. So please join us in our fight for more newborn screening appropriations. We'll be getting our engagement up on our website early next week, and you can find it at mda.org/advocacy, or I'm sure via EveryLife Foundation and Rdla. You can hit the next slide. That's it for me. I was quick and easy. If anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat box or the Q&A now, or shoot me an email. I am always happy to talk. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Brittany. We do have one question in the chat box. I think Dylan or Brittany could actually answer this, but Tammy's asking, what's the most newborn screenings a state has in the United States?
So I believe that there are at least a few states that screen for every condition on the list, plus a few more. Dylan might know more than that, considering the fact that I really do focus on neuromuscular conditions. But there are, you know, most states screen for, I think, at least 32 out of the 35. Isn't that right, Dylan?
So all states screen for at least 31. The number, we're getting closer to at least 32. There are 9 states that screen for at least all 35 RUS conditions. And there are multiple states that I know the number starts getting up to the 40s and 50s in terms of other conditions that I'm not aware of. But in terms of RUS, all screen for at least 31, and 9 at the moment screen for all 35.
Great. Go ahead.
Just one other question on the chat about the appropriations bill, whether it starts in the Senate or the House. I think the answer is that you're concentrating on the Senate because the House finished their bill. Is that correct?
Yes, so the House has already passed an appropriations bill. The Senate has not yet, but as you guys know, Congress is crazy, anything can happen. So we are making this request of both the House and the Senate that whatever the final legislation is, that it includes these levels of funding.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Jamie.
Hi, thanks, Shannon. My name is Jamie Louie, and I am the Program Communication Specialist at Expecting Health at Genetic Alliance, and I'll be talking about the impact of COVID on newborn screening. Next slide. So before I delve deeper into the ways that COVID has impacted newborn screening, I wanted to share and provide some context around what new and expectant parents are how new and expecting parents are navigating the pandemic, because it's really important to remember that newborn screening is part of a larger healthcare experience for families. And the picture on the right is a friend of the organization's who had a baby in the midst of the pandemic. Baby Amelia was born in May during a time where new COVID-19 information was emerging every day. Hospital and visitor rules were forever changing, and parents' worries and fears were definitely heightened during this time. Next slide, please. And many of these stories have been captured in the news, and it's really important to center these experiences in order for us to really support them. And we're seeing that many mothers are concerned about being alone in labor without their partner and without their support system. Expectant mothers have also expressed just overall fear, fear for the unknown, fear for their baby's health, and fear for their own health. And lastly, COVID has exacerbated many health inequities, especially among Black moms who are already 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications compared to white moms. Next slide, please. And we're really seeing that families aren't given the information that they need to feel supported. And pregnancy is already a time where women are feeling anxious and they're feeling worried. And COVID-19 has definitely heightened many of these concerns with, again, moms afraid of being separated from their baby or that their birth plan will change. And I'll read some quotes that I feel like really embodies kind of what some of these experiences are. I'm getting anxious about weird things that I never thought I would be thinking about, like whether or not I want medical professionals to even touch my baby. Does my baby even need to wear a mask? Another quote is, I worry that I'll be diagnosed with COVID at the time of delivery and be separated immediately from my son. I'm concerned that due to hospital overcrowding, there won't be space for me to deliver and I'll be turned away. And I'm definitely not prepared for the logistics of a home birth. Next slide, please. So home birth kind of has emerged as a large area of interest for new and expecting parents. And we're hearing that there has been an increase in interest around home births, especially at the end of March. Google searches in the US for home birth were at the highest that it's been in the past 5 years. So they're really, it's really clear that there's been interest. However, this interest hasn't exactly translated to an increased rates in home birth, but it's definitely something that we need to keep an eye on so we know how we can support the midwives and doulas that are helping these home births, as well as the parents that are choosing to deliver their babies at home. Next slide, please. So now that I provided some context around what it's like to being pregnant during COVID-19, I'll share some of the questions and concerns that we've received around newborn screening. And many of these questions have come from our Ask the Expert form on Baby's First Test, which allows a user to ask an anonymous question. And then these questions are, the program staff at Baby's First Test will answer the questions, or we'll refer them to an expert. And many of these questions are focused on staff capacity and well-being, as well as the changing rules and regulations around newborn screening. So the questions are, how are hospitals considering newborn screening non-essential? How are providers and public health professionals dealing with the strain of the pandemic? What are hospitals or health facilities doing during this time to make sure that their staff are safe? Do hospitals have dedicated staff who will continue to conduct all 3 components of newborn screening? Has healthcare offices closed or reduced staff? Are there clear instructions for how to maintain newborn screening follow-up and processes? Will my baby be exposed to COVID-19 while at the hospital for testing? And what plans do we have in place for babies who are not screened and those who need additional testing? So it's really important that we not only address these questions and these concerns now, but we really use this to inform and integrate our long-term communications plans. Next slide, please. And many of these questions are a reflection of a larger systemic concerns around newborn screening. So due to staff being furloughed or just staff availability, there's been shifts on who conducts the screenings, which either require additional training for staff or additional communications. And because hospital stays have been reduced, it's led to some infants being missed for screening or some parents declining screenings because they don't want their infants in the hospital any longer than they need to. In addition to these concerns, there's been delays in treatments due to disruptions in drug supply and office closures, as well as disruptions in clinical trials and pilot studies. And as we settle into COVID-19 and we move into more long-term systems and solutions, it's really important that we acknowledge these questions, these concerns, and these family experiences and make sure that they're integrated into our data collection methods. And as we collect data about COVID-19 and newborn screening, these experiences really should inform how we ask our questions, how we conduct our research, and lastly, like how we communicate our information. And here are some examples of how you can communicate newborn screening to families very broadly. And it's important to emphasize that newborn screening is an essential public health service that continues to happen because babies continue to be born every day. And it's estimated that 3.3 million babies are projected to be born between March 11th and December 16th. And that just shows that babies are popping out. People are going through this pandemic pregnant. People are considering family planning, and we really need to have our messaging reflect that, and also to really reassure many families that your healthcare facility and your healthcare team are taking the precautions to take care of you and your baby, and to really, and they prioritize your health and well-being. And I think as more families are thinking about their family planning and their pregnancies, it's really important that we provide that reassuring, that reliable and trustworthy messaging. And also what's important is that during this time where information and recommendations are evolving and emerging, it's really important that we stay consistent. Families need to hear the same things wherever they go and every time they interact with the healthcare system. And it's really important that we remain consistent, that we remain relatable and reliable. Next slide, please. And yeah, this is just our acknowledgements. I really want to thank our team at Expecting Health, Natasha, Phenome, and Annie, and a special thanks to all of our advisors who have really put their heads together to see what the impacts are in newborn screening. And next slide. Yep, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Also follow along Baby's First Test as we celebrate Newborn Screening Awareness Month. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. That was really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that information with us. Next, we have Dr. Sessions Cole joining us.
Yes, thank you very much. And on behalf of the Undiagnosed Diseases Network and my colleague, Dr. Halley, I'd like to thank the Every Life Foundation for the opportunity to share with you some of the background, some of the impact, and some of the opportunities that the Undiagnosed Diseases Network provide for rare disease patients. Probably the single most important milestone for any rare disease patient or family is establishment of a diagnosis. And the Undiagnosed Diseases Network, over the course of the past decade, has committed itself to shortening the diagnostic odyssey for undiagnosed and rare disease patients. I want to share with you a bit about the history of how the Undiagnosed Diseases Network has developed, about its current operations, and Dr. Halley will provide her perspective on behalf of the families and patients who have received diagnoses or who have been evaluated by the Undiagnosed Diseases Network. So the Undiagnosed Diseases Network is currently funded by the National Institutes of Health, and to become a member, a site has to compete with many other sites around the country. The goal of the Undiagnosed Diseases Network is to solve medical mysteries through team science. And this goal was first established by Dr. William Gahl, G-A-H-L, who is a geneticist at the National Institutes of Health. And Dr. Gahl recognized that there was an important opportunity to apply advanced or state-of-the-art gene code deciphering strategies to help shorten the diagnostic odyssey. As I'm sure everyone is aware, there's been a dramatic advancement of our ability to understand and identify gene code problems that are associated with undiagnosed or rare diseases. And so initially, Dr. Gahl set up a program within the National Institutes of Health in which he effectively used crowdsourcing of expertise by clinicians, by individuals who are experts in gene code deciphering strategies, and by people who understand how to analyze gene code. And what he did was he established a program that would bring patients into the National Institutes of Health and provide them a deep evaluation of every one of their objective symptoms that might include anything from advanced x-rays like MRIs, metabolic testing, and also would include testing of every base pair in the patient and the patient's first-degree family members, usually parents. The advantage of using what are called trios, parents and an undiagnosed patient, is that from a computational analysis perspective of the gene code sequence in the affected individual, it's possible to identify likely candidate genetic code differences between the affected individual, use a child or an adult, and parents or first-degree relatives. And this unbiased approach to try to understand and shorten the diagnostic odyssey for these patients was extremely successful. so successful that Dr. Gall convinced Dr. Francis Collins, who is the director of the National Institutes of Health, to fund initially 6 clinical sites and more recently 12 clinical sites. You can see them here on the screen across the country, as well as several other important resources. There is a sequencing or gene code deciphering center at Baylor where all of the gene code sequencing, so-called whole genome sequencing, is performed. There's also a metabolomic center at the Mayo Clinic where specialized testing can be performed to help identify signatures in blood or urine or cerebrospinal fluid that might lead to a diagnosis. We also have a biorepository which holds samples so that if future individuals, scientists, wish to try to make diagnoses or compare diagnoses, samples are available, and a coordinating center that helps to implement and advance a manual of operations which makes the Undiagnosed Diseases Network consistent and coherent for patients and their families. So next slide. The Undiagnosed Diseases Network has been successful in solving medical mysteries and shortening diagnostic odysseys. These are data from the New England Journal of Medicine publication about the first 4 years of the Undiagnosed Diseases Network. If just advance the slides, there'll be some red boxes that'll show up. So as you can see there, at that point, there were 382 patients who had completed evaluation. Next. And 35% of them received a diagnosis. So these are patients who had been on diagnostic odysseys that usually extended years, had seen multiple different providers, and had not had a diagnosis. Interestingly, next slide, some of these patients received their diagnosis simply by a clinical review through the crowdsourcing of expertise within the Undiagnosed Diseases Network. Next slide, there were about 11% who received diagnoses by direct clinical testing. Next slide, there were some non-sequencing genome-wide diagnostic assays that led to diagnoses, for example, epigenomic testing. Next slide. The majority, however, of patients who received a diagnosis through whole exome or whole genome sequencing, as I have described earlier. Next slide. And finally, there still were 65% of these patients in 2018, those evaluated, who do not have a diagnosis. Next slide. So the accomplishments of the UDN more recently, we've received over 4,600 applications. We have evaluated over 1,400 patients. We've provided diagnoses to 429 of those over 1,400 patients for approximately a 30% success rate. Importantly, of the over 90 manuscripts that have been published based on these, on the network's work, there have been recognized more than 30 new diseases. And in addition, many of the patients have been recognized as having diseases with slightly different characteristics than had been previously described for the same diseases. So there's been significant discovery advancement for these patients and their families. Next slide. And the opportunity that the Undiagnosed Diseases Network is currently facing is that the funding from the National Institutes of Health for the network expires in June of 2022. We are hopeful that we can convince, with support from rare disease and undiagnosed disease advocates, that federal funding for the UDN should be available. And there will be, however, need for partnerships with third-party payers, pharmaceutical companies, philanthropic agencies, rare disease patient organizations, and academic medical centers. And we hope to be able to partner with everyone who is listening on this webinar, as well as the Every Life Foundation, to try to ensure that the Undiagnosed Diseases Network continues and is sustainable after June of 2022. Dr. Halley will now describe her personal experiences with the UDN.
Thank you, Dr. Cole. Can everyone hear me? Let me know if you can't hear me. My name is Megan Halley, and I am a parent of a patient in the Undiagnosed Diseases Network and a member of the UDN Participant Engagement and Empowerment Resource that we call PEER. And we're a group of current UDN participants and parents of participants, and we volunteer to coordinate communication, support, and education for others in the UDN who are all over the country. And today I'd like to share our family's story as a way of illustrating the value of the UDN and what it brings to the undiagnosed rare diseases community in particular. Next slide, please. So this is my 5-year-old son, Philip. He is a spunky, funny, super brave kid, but under that really great smile is a whole mess of a medical mystery. We knew Philip had medical problems before he was born, but because of some abnormalities picked up on fetal ultrasound. Next slide. He was induced early and had to undergo some pretty grueling surgery on his bowel when he was just 3 days old to remove some portions and to address a large meconium pseudocyst that had formed in utero. Next slide. But we were able to take him home on his original due date, actually, feeling like we had really dodged a bullet. Next slide. But 2 weeks later, we were back in the hospital, this time for persistent neonatal jaundice, which turned out to be a rare form of pediatric liver disease, which the doctors told us there was no evidence that the bowel and the liver issues, though both quite rare, were related. And they told us, and this is a quote, that we were struck by lightning twice. Next slide, please. And this kid's smile just got brighter, but the rest of his body just continued to break all the rules, requiring further surgery and baffling his physicians, leading us through what I'm sure many on the call are aware of, the endless series of tests and hospitalizations associated with the diagnostic odyssey. Next slide. But it wasn't until he was almost 2 and woke up unable to stand or to eat, not until the doctors in the ER told us that he had suffered a major stroke out of the blue, that we truly began to realize how much we didn't know about Philip. And it was a young trainee doc who, unable to accept this notion that we had been struck by lightning 3 times, really pulled every string he could to connect us to the Undiagnosed Diseases Network. Next slide. And so I know this sounds like hyperbole, but finding the Undiagnosed Diseases Network really felt like the clouds parting for our family. We finally found doctors, physicians, a team that understood this morass of confusion and fear that was consuming our daily lives, not knowing what was happening with our son. Suddenly they were asking the right questions, and I think the biggest thing is they just promised to never stop or to never give up until they found a diagnosis. So through the UDN, Philip has received, the most cutting-edge genetic testing available, some of which Dr. Cole already described. So that included whole exome and whole genome sequencing, and something called RNA sequencing, which frankly still continues to exceed my generally generous capacity to understand science. But I think most valuable is he's been connected to this incredible network of physician scientists who are committed to finding answers for kids like Philip. Next slide. So as you're all aware, 30 million Americans are living with rare and undiagnosed diseases, and this diagnostic odyssey that families endure like our own are long, painful, expensive for the patients, for their families, and for the healthcare system. And in the end of all of this, many of us still remain undiagnosed, leaving us with no compass, no guiding principles on which to make decisions about the healthcare of our loved ones. but I'm here speaking with you today because I feel so strongly that our healthcare system and our country can do better for these millions of undiagnosed patients and their families. The UDN, offers an incredible solution to a major and mostly unrecognized problem in our healthcare system. Next slide, please. But as Dr. Cole mentioned, the original funding stream for the UDN is changing as the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, is looking to shift the UDN from research to a more widely available clinical resource. This is an opportunity and a risk as the leadership, including Dr. Cole, seek to establish a more sustainable model and a steady stream of funding. Within each state in the U.S., there are sure to be thousands of patients and families who would benefit from this resource. However, in the current model, as you can see, there are only a relatively small number of sites scattered around the country. And I live in California, but I am a diehard Midwesterner who is very dedicated to ensuring that equity and access to healthcare resources for regardless of where you live in this incredible country of ours. I am personally committed to trying to not only sustain, but also expand access to this incredible resource. Next slide, please. So over the years, as a member of PEER and of the UDN, and being able to connect with some of my fellow participants in this study, in this program, I've been able to witness them receiving a diagnosis after their incredible odyssey. Many of them receiving diagnoses that before they were found were beyond the limits of medical knowledge. Though treatment still remains out of reach for many of them, this diagnosis can bring peace of mind and hope for the future because, as we all know, you can't treat what you can't diagnose. Finding a diagnosis has also allowed many of them to connect with the small number of other patients and families with the same rare condition, providing a community and social and emotional support that is an incredibly valuable resource and something that many undiagnosed families like ours are really missing. Next slide. So as of today, my Philip still remains undiagnosed. Since joining the UDN, he's had to undergo a liver transplant for progressive liver failure and has collected a whole bunch of additional unexplained symptoms. And actually, as I'm speaking to you today, he was just readmitted to the hospital yesterday for a new problem that we don't know what it's about. But he also started kindergarten, at least virtually, this fall, and his favorite activity is riding his bike and messing with his older sister and younger brother. If the UDN wasn't trying to find answers for him, our family, honestly, we don't know what we would do. And I'm deeply proud, even though Philip remains diagnosed, of his participation and that the contribution of that participation to this incredibly valuable resource. And that's why I'm equally committed to ensuring that others can access this resource as well. The UDN's work is unique and essential, but for Philip and the many others who have not been able to had the opportunity to access it, it really is unfinished work. Which is why I know I speak for the other members of the PEER group at the UDN and for myself when I say that we are committed to doing whatever it takes to sustain and expand this resource. And as Dr. Cole said, I'm not an advocate. I'm just a mom. And I don't know about advocacy, but we're really committed to doing whatever we can to sustain this resource. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak with you today.
Thank you so much, Megan. I do have two questions in our chat box that perhaps you or Dr. Cole can answer. I know you touched, obviously, and thank you so much for sharing Philip's and your family's story and connection to the Undiagnosed Diseases Network. You touched a little bit on, what the patient journey looks like. Sarah was asking about whether the patients need to go to multiple centers and then what the process is for being directed after getting a diagnosis.
Yes, so I can answer that very briefly. So there is a website for the UDN called the Gateway, and a patient or a family applies to the UDN through the Gateway and gives permission for the UDN to access medical records from all different sources that we can find. And then after the records are sort of pulled together, the patient is assigned to one of the 12 clinical sites, and that clinical site becomes the patient's home for diagnosis. And all of the sort of diagnostic coordination and counseling are done through a single clinical site for each patient. I would say also that the UDN has really developed best practices for integrating information from multiple different sites. And we also have a very large now database of over 1,400 patients who have gone through evaluations and who can help inform our diagnostic approaches to a future undiagnosed and rare disease patients.
Great, thank you. Last question is what you think the sustainable funding method for UDN will be once you transition from the NIH Common Fund?
Yes, I think we're optimistic that the NIH will continue some modest amount of funding for some of the more research-oriented activities that come out of the UDN. Many of the diagnostic journeys require testing of different gene code differences in a variety of different kind of model systems like worms and fruit flies and zebrafish. So the NIH hopefully will continue to fund some of that, but we also have developed dialogues with third-party payers, because third-party payers recognize that undiagnosed patients are expensive, and that currently the third-party payers are compensating different sites as the individual patients and families go on these prolonged diagnostic journeys, frequently repeating same tests sort of over and over again. So we're optimistic that we are going to be able to develop funding and sustainability strategies with third-party payers, and as well as with philanthropic organizations. We also think that the pharmaceutical industry is likely to be interested in helping to sustain the Undiagnosed Diseases Network. We're also optimistic that the companies that make gene code deciphering devices will also help support. So we're looking at a variety of different sources for sustainability, and we would love the ideas and support of the Every Life Foundation and all of its constituents as we move forward in this important sustainability initiative.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I look forward to hearing more as that progresses. And by we should say that by third-party payers, you mean like private insurers.
Correct, as well as Medicare, Medicaid, and the Veterans Administration. We've had conversations with all of them.
Perfect. All right, well, I don't see any other questions in the box. Caitlin, you want to advance to the next slide? So thank you. I should first say thank you so much to our speakers. It was really a pleasure having you all on today. And I know I learned a lot. So I hope our advocates took away something from each of you as well. Our next webinar for the RDLA monthly webinars will be next month, October 15th. If there are any particular topics you would like us to cover during the webinar, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself at sbonfelden@everylifefoundation.org. We are always interested in hearing from you all. Caitlin? And then lastly, we just would like to thank our sponsors of the webinar who helped make this possible. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. You get 4 minutes back for your day. Good luck to you all, especially those who are homeschooling their children right now. My heart goes out to all of you. So thank you so much for being with us today, and look forward to seeing you all next month. Thank you.